Okay, this is the second video in the SIE exam series. This is going to be part two of knowledge of capital markets, which is 16% of the entire SIE exam. And this slideshow is going to be on market structure and participants. Remember, this is not financial advice. This is only for your educational purposes for anybody who's trying to prepare for the SIE exam. Now, let's get started. In this video, we will go over 7 concepts about market structure and its participants. We will be talking about exchanges and OTC markets, market participation, broker dealers versus investment advisors, market makers, types of investors, and SROs and regulators. Let's get into this. First concept we're going to be going over is exchange markets versus over-the-counter markets. Exchange markets are centralized where trades happen on a physical or an electronic trade exchange. Think about the New York Stock Exchange, think of NASDAQ. These are very, very primary examples of exchange markets. Now, let's talk about how the requirements on these exchange markets are extremely strict. They're highly regulated. They are pretty much the stereotypical exchange you think of when you think of stock trading. Now, the price transparency, the bid and ask prices for these exchange markets have to be very public, and they have regular trading hours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. New York Standard Time. Now, let's talk about over the counter markets. These are decentralized. Think crypto, think NFTs, all of these more um, not standardized markets per se. Trades directly happen between parties via dealer networks. There's no central exchange negotiated via FINRA systems. They have less stringent listing requirements and they're used for smaller companies, bonds, derivatives, etc. And they use bulletin boards as well as pink sheets. Technically, yes, the crypto market does count under the OTC markets because there was a period in time in which, depending on what exchange you used, the price of Bitcoin would actually be slightly different. And a key point here is the exchange equals centralized, transparent. OTC equals decentralized, flexible, and not always accurate. That's an important concept to remember. Next, let's talk about market participants. First, we have the issuers. Now, the issuers are where the stock, where the bonds actually come from. In this case, you have the companies that issue the stock, you have the governments that issue the bonds. They sell securities to raise capital to investors and hopefully to you if you are investing. Next, we have broker dealers. Everyone's watched The Wolf of Wall Street. We all know the scene at the beginning with Jordan Belfort. It's all a fugazi. The brokers, they sell the stock to you. They don't care if they make money, or they don't care if you make money, as long as they're able to carry home cold hard cash via commission. Next, we have investment advisors. These are the professionals who provide securities advice for compensation. Now, they carry a thing that broker dealers don't have. They have what's called fiduciary duty. That means investment advisors are legally and morally bound to give you the best advice for yourself. That is the career path that I'm personally trying to pursue, an investment advisor career path. Next, you have the investor, who is the person or the fund slash institution who is going to buy securities. They are the end users who hold all of the securities in the capital market. Lastly, you have the market makers. The market makers are the dealers. They continuously post bid and ask price for the securities, providing liquidity. You must buy or sell a security at the quoted price of the dealer. Let's talk about broker dealers. Remember, the broker is the person who executes the trade on behalf of the client. They earn a commission for the transaction. They do not take ownership of the security, and they're a middleman who communicates between the dealer and the investor. Now, if you have a broker dealer, this is an entity that is acting both as the broker and as the dealer. So the dealer has their own inventory where they hold these securities, and they either have a markup or a markdown on the price of the security. They actually have direct ownership of the security and they act as the principal in the transaction. A requirement to be a broker dealer is you must register with FINRA. You must register with the SEC under the Exchange Act, and you are subject to net capital requirements. You must follow all the FINRA conduct rules in order to be a broker-dealer. Broker-dealers versus investment advisors. What is the difference? So let's look at how they're paid. Again, brokers are paid by commission. They take home cold, hard cash via commission. Investment advisors, they charge you a fee. This is either going to be percentage of AUM, a flat fee, which is the most ideal, or an hourly rate. If, for example, they are like a hedge fund or something. Standard of care. So the thing about the broker dealer is that they make money based on how many trades their client executes. That's not necessarily sustainable because most broker dealers want to make sure their clients execute as many trades as possible. So they have a sustainability standard that they have to hit. On the other hand, an investment advisor carries a legal duty to their client. That's called fiduciary standard, which is a higher bar of sustainability. Their job is to make sure the client makes as much money as possible or plays into their risk tolerance, per se. Registration. For a broker dealer, you must register with FINRA and with the SEC. And for an investment advisor greater than $110 million AUM, they must register with the SEC or the state if otherwise. Primary role of a broker dealer is to execute these trades and to sell products to the investor, whereas the investment advisor provides ongoing investment advice to their clients. The conflict of interest here, again, the broker dealer makes more money via commission when you make more trades versus the investment advisor who's legally required to put their client first. A key point for the exam is that the investment advisors are held to fiduciary duty, while broker dealers, they're they're held to sustainability, and this is heavily tested on the exam. Let's talk about market makers. A market maker is a dealer, and they continuously quote a bid and an ask price. What is a bid? A bid is a price to buy a security, where an ask is a price to sell a security, providing liquidity to the market at all times. The bid-ask spread is the difference between the bid price and the ask price. The spread is the gap between the ask and the bid. The tighter the spread, the more liquid the item is. For example, the fund VOO, highly liquid. A penny stock, less liquid. The spread between bid and ask may be wider. Obligation to quote. Registered market makers must post continuous firm quotes. They cannot step away. They must provide liquidity even in volatile markets. They can't stop people from trading even if the S&P 500 is falling. Primarily, market makers operate in over-the-counter markets and in the Nasdaq. They are essential for less liquid securities that don't trade on central exchanges. Principal capacity. Market makers always act as dealers. They buy and they sell from their own inventory, never as agents for any client. Let's talk about the type of investors. There's going to be three types of investors in this slide. There's going to be retail, institutional, and accredited investors. Individuals, small time investors, me, possibly you, are going to be considered as retail investors. Individual investors who personally trade their own account or maybe a family member under the table. They are protected by most securities regulations. They have access to publicly regulated securities, and they're subject to sustainability requirements with a broker dealer. Institutional investors. They are pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, maybe even hedge funds. They trade in large volumes, low transaction costs. They have less protections, and everyone assumes that these funds are sophisticated. However, we as smart investors know that most hedge funds, most pension funds, most mutual funds underperform the S&P 500 over the long term. They have more access, since they're institutions, they have more access to private markets and emerging markets and these alternative uh, forms of investing. Accredited investors. Accredited investors are individuals with a net worth over $1 million, excluding their primary residence, or have an income of 200K plus 300K joint if they are married, Or an accredited investor could also be a person who has completed the Series 7, Series 65, or Series 82 license. They can access Reg D offerings, which are not open to retail investors. All right, let's look at the SROs, which stands for self-regulatory organizations and other regulators. First, we have the SEC, which is a government organization. The SEC stands for Securities and Exchange Commission. They are the top level of federal regulators of U.S. securities markets. They enforce all of the security laws. They oversee the other SROs. They require disclosure from public companies. Let's look at FINRA. FINRA is the organization who you're going to be taking the SIE exam with. They are a self-regulatory organization for broker-dealers. All broker-dealers must be FINRA members. Administers license exam, including the SIE, Series 65, Series 67, etc. Let's look at the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Stock Exchange is an exchange and an SRO. They set listing requirements for the companies and securities that are looking to get listed on the NYSE. They also have trading rules that are overseen by the SEC. MSRB, Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, they regulate securities. They regulate security detailer. Oh my gosh. They regulate municipal securities dealers. They create rules, but they rely on FINRA and the SEC to enforce them. They have no direct enforcement power. So, what we covered today is we covered the exchange versus the over-the-counter market, centralized versus decentralized trading markets, market participants, broker dealers versus investment advisors, and what fiduciary duty actually means, and how broker dealers and investment advisors get paid. We talked about market makers, types of investors, the SROs that you need to know, as well as the regulators that you need to know. As usual, we're going to be doing some practice questions to test your knowledge on market structures and market participants. We have 5 questions of increasing difficulty with an answer explanation provided for you. First question. Which of the following best describes an over-the-counter market? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to answer this question. 3, 2, 1. The correct answer for this is going to be B, a decentralized dealer network where securities trade directly between parties. This is correct because an over-counter market has no central exchange. Remember, the trades are negotiated directly between dealers and counterparties through a network overseen by FINRA. This contrasts with exchange market like the New York Stock Exchange, where securities are centralized and transparent. 2. A firm buys 500 shares of a stock into its own inventory, then sells them to a client at a higher price. The firm is acting as a... I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to answer this question. And the correct answer is going to be B, a dealer, because they are the one that gets to set the price. Since the firm is acting as a dealer, the profit is the markup. The broker never takes ownership of the deal. They only execute the deal on behalf of the client and they earn a commission. Question 3. A client wants someone to continuously monitor their portfolio and make decisions on their behalf. Which professional is most appropriate and why? The answer to question 3 is going to be B, an investment advisor, because they are giving you real-time fiduciary advice, fiduciary duty. They provide ongoing advisory services. Investment advisors, they're built for an ongoing relationship. Broker dealer, you can call them once, you can call them twice, but you have no obligation to talk to them over and over again. An investment advisor is someone who's there for you to have a continuous relationship with. They act in the client's best interest at all times. Broker dealers only meet a sustainability standard. Question 4. A PE firm raises capital via a Reg D offering. A prospective investor earns 180K annually and has an 800K net worth, excluding their primary residence. Which of the following is the most accurate? The answer is going to be B. They do not qualify as an accredited investor. Remember, in order to qualify as an accredited investor, your net worth has to be over 1 million, excluding your primary residence. You have to be a 200K plus earner or 300K joint for the past 2 years. And you can also take the Series 7, 65, or 83 license in order to become an accredited investor if you don't meet the other requirements. Question 5. A broker-dealer violates FINRA conduct rules in a municipal bond transaction, which correctly describes the regulatory framework. Okay, the answer for question 5 is going to be C. FINRA enforces the rules, the MSRB rules against the member broker dealers. Yeah, MSRB cannot enforce their own rules. FINRA and as well as the SEC have to enforce the rules for them. This is an important part of the exam that you need to remember. The MSRB has no direct enforcement authority. They cannot fine, they cannot suspend, they can't penalize any broker-dealer on its own without FINRA or the SEC involved. How did you score? If you got a 5 out of 5, you're going to get the Series 65. You're going to get the SIE exam. You're going to be great in the exam. You have a really, really good amount of knowledge for the test. If you got a 4 or a 5, you have a solid foundation, but you need to review what you missed. If you got 1 to 2 questions correct, you have to rewatch this video and try again. I encourage you heavily to click the subscribe button, click the like button, because video 3 drops next. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video coming very, very soon about the SIE exam. Goodbye.